Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's jump right in. Just imagine waking up one day and realizing your country has this sudden, completely unexpected opportunity to just hurl itself directly into the space age. Literally. No multi-decade planning, no massive, sprawling space agency at the helm, just a tight-knit group of brilliant engineers, one spare rocket, and a seriously fast-ticking clock. Well, that is exactly what went down in Australia in the late 1960s. Today, we're unpacking the wild, almost entirely forgotten story of a satellite named WRESAT. It's a story of absolute ingenuity, and it perfectly shows what can happen when passionate people get just a tiny sliver of a chance. So ask yourself, could you build a fully functional satellite in just 11 months? Really think about the immense pressure of that scenario. Normally, a project of this magnitude takes years. We're talking about building a highly sensitive machine that has to survive the violent, bone-rattling shaking of a rocket launch, navigate the freezing vacuum of space, and somehow still manage to transmit data back to Earth. But this team in Australia, they didn't have years. They had a fraction of the normal time to build a spacecraft. Completely from scratch. To truly wrap our heads around how they actually pull this off, we kind of have to look at the environment they were working in.
Which brings us to Section 1, the unexpected opportunity. So, to set the scene, let's travel back to the 1960s, specifically to a place called Woomera in South Australia. Believe it or not, back then, the remote desert of Woomera was actually one of the busiest rocket ranges in the entire world. You had British and American rockets frequently tearing across the sky. And because of all this constant activity, the local scientists at the Weapons Research Establishment near Adelaide had racked up some serious hands-on experience with missiles and upper atmosphere research. But here's the catch. Australia was merely the host. They had never actually launched their own satellite. Then, in 1967, everything changed. They suddenly found themselves sitting on one spare American Sparta rocket. It was just sitting there, unused, a leftover piece of hardware from a bunch of joint missile experiments. Now, rather than just pack it up and ship it home, the local engineers had this brilliantly crazy idea. They looked at that spare hardware and asked a very simple but massive question. Could we use it to launch an Australian satellite? And, amazingly enough, the answer was yes. And that is what gave birth to WRESAT. That stands for the Weapons Research Establishment Satellite. This was officially proposed as Australia's very first homegrown spacecraft. The engineers essentially just asked for permission to use that leftover Sparta rocket to launch a satellite of their own making. It was an incredibly bold move, a real chance to step out of the shadows of the British and American programs and stake their own claim in the cosmos. But getting the green light, well, that was literally only the beginning of their problems. That leads us right into Section 2, the 11-month sprint. So, while the answer to their bold proposal was a resounding yes, it came with an absolutely massive hurdle. They were given an impossibly tight deadline, 11 months. Just let that sink in. 11 months. Think about the sheer panic, but also the incredible adrenaline rush of having less than a single year to accomplish a feat of engineering that normally requires years of meticulous planning, testing, failing, and redesigning. This wasn't just a tough challenge, right? It was a dead sprint against the clock. Every single day mattered. Because of that insane time crunch, their whole engineering philosophy had to completely shift. Look at typical satellites. They take years to develop and are incredibly complex. But WRESAT, it had to be absolutely simple and completely reliable. There was zero room for complicated designs or experimental tech that hadn't already been proven. Every single component literally had to work perfectly the first time. The entire approach had to shift purely to survival and core function. So, what did they actually manage to pull off in that short window? Well, the final result was a spacecraft weighing just 45 kilograms. That is remarkably lightweight. To put that into perspective, imagine a small, cone-shaped object about the weight of a large piece of checked luggage. That was it. That little 45-kilogram cone was Australia's actual ticket into the space age. Now, you might be wondering, what was this small cone actually going to do once it got up there? Unlike the massive modern satellites we rely on today that carry heavy cameras and super complex communication systems, WRESAT was built purely for discovery. Its scientific targets were the sun's X-rays, ultraviolet radiation, and atmospheric density. The scientists wanted to measure these specific things hundreds of kilometers above the Earth to really improve our knowledge of the ionosphere. And that data would directly contribute to future missile and space research. It's totally crucial to understand that this was a scientific satellite. It wasn't built for international prestige or just bragging rights. It was built to genuinely expand human knowledge.
And that brings us to Section 3, launching into history. So all the rushing, all the designing, all those late nights in the lab finally brought the team to a crisp spring morning, November 29, 1967. Excitement was at an absolute fever pitch at the Woomera launch pad. Engineers, technicians, military personnel, they were all gathered around. Years of collective preparation and 11 months of frantic, hyper-focused work were all riding on this single moment as the Sparta rocket stood ready. The engines ignited, the rocket climbed into the clear South Australian sky, and just minutes later, the confirmation arrived. WRESAT had successfully reached orbit. With that launch, Australia officially became the 7th nation in the entire world to put its own satellite into orbit. And what's even more remarkable, what really made it a wildly proud moment for those engineers, is that they did it right from Australian soil. This astonishing sprint proved, absolutely beyond a doubt, that Australia had the elite scientific chops needed to play in the space age. Once it was up in orbit, this little 45-kilogram cone immediately went to work. It was traveling around the globe at unbelievable speeds, completing a full revolution every 90 minutes. Imagine that. Every hour and a half, it was doing a full lap of the entire Earth, successfully running its instruments and beaming invaluable scientific data right back down to the engineers waiting on the ground. It was an incredibly successful but, very short mission. Starting with that flawless launch on November 29th, the scientific instruments operated perfectly for the first 73 orbits, pulling down all that crucial data on solar radiation and the upper atmosphere. Over the following weeks, it completed more than 600 revolutions around the Earth. But eventually, physics always takes over, right? Atmospheric drag began to slow the spacecraft down. By early 1968, WRESAT re-entered the atmosphere, burning up forever in a fiery descent over the Atlantic Ocean. Its mission had only lasted weeks, but man, it burned bright, and its place in history was entirely secure. Which takes us to our final part, Section 4, a fated legacy. Now, you would naturally think a huge national milestone like this would be the ultimate kickoff for a massive ongoing space program. I mean, a lot of people at the time, for sure, believed WRESAT was just going to be the first in a long, impressive line of Australian satellites. But the bittersweet reality? There was no WRESAT-2. Despite having the brilliant engineers, despite having the world-class launch facilities right there at Woomera, and despite proving to the entire globe that they could succeed, history kind of took a different path. While other nations heavily funded their ambitious space programs, Australia's early momentum just faded. The capability was absolutely there, but that sustained push, it just wasn't. Still, we absolutely cannot let that faded momentum take away from the sheer magnitude of what they pulled off in 1967. As the source material beautifully puts it, without fanfare, without a space agency, and without enormous budgets, they accomplished something remarkable. I really love this quote because it hits the nail right on the head. It cements the ultimate underdog achievement of the WRESAT team. In just 11 months, they transformed a spare, leftover rocket into a soaring national triumph. They didn't need billions of dollars or endless layers of bureaucracy. They literally just needed an opportunity and the pure drive to make it happen. And that brings us to a final parting thought for this explainer. If they achieved all of this in just 11 months, with a spare rocket they basically found lying around, what could they have done with a real space program? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? It leaves you wondering about the absolute heights of human ingenuity when it's fully unleashed. And yeah, maybe the bittersweet reality of missed opportunities. But more than anything, the story of WRESAT is an incredibly inspiring reminder of what focused, passionate people can build when the clock is ticking. Thanks so much for joining me today. Keep wondering, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.